Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 is now a game over 15 years old, but in that 15 years, many Dragon Ball fans still claim it to be their favorite Dragon Ball game. However, something not talked about during that amount of time is actually Budokai Tenkaichi 3's insane prototype. Prototypes for games aren't an uncommon thing. In fact, they're used as early builds to be able to test things and be able to change things and be able to see what changed from an old version to a new version. Budokai Tenkaichi 3 is not a stranger to this, so that's what I want to show you guys today. The insanity that is the Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 prototype and all its contents. I hope you all enjoy. So, very similar to other games, Budokai Tenkaichi 3 doesn't have just one prototype, it actually has multiple. Though the interesting thing to note about the other prototypes, that they all are pretty much the exact same as the final game, maybe with a text change or two, being the fact that most of them are dated only 10 days before the game's release date. However, one of the most interesting versions of the game's prototype, and the most interesting in my opinion, probably a few others, is the fact that this Taikanban prototype has an insane amount of changes that you probably would never have guessed were even changed, being only about 4 months out from actual release date, the Japanese release date being October 8th, 2007, and then we have July 11th, 2007, the date being assigned to this prototype's build. So to prevent this video from being 10,000 hours long, I'm going to go over just some of the changes as we encounter them, and then of course go over some of the main notable changes. The first thing you'll notice before even starting the game or pressing any buttons, this game is actually internally referred to as Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2. This is of course because the game was built off of BT2. This build was made before that name was changed. Next up, you're going to notice when you first start up the game is the game's sound effects on the main menu are of course very different than the final builds. This is nothing that's extremely crazy, as most games' early versions have different sound effects and SFX and all that stuff. However, something pretty interesting that I found on the cutting room floor, which is one of the biggest websites that helped me make this video, is the fact that the press start button is actually a lot bigger than the one in the final game. This, of course, was probably done just to probably simplify the main menu so you can see a bit more of the artwork, which of course still looks really good. Pressing the start button won't actually take you to the save or load game function, it'll actually take you right to dual mode. Apparently, every single mode outside of dual mode is completely locked out of this build. I assume this is probably done because it's just unnecessary to be able to test those modes, as this build, as we will discuss in just a few minutes, was mainly meant to test characters and the abilities and just the gameplay mechanics, so having all those other modes in would probably just slow down the amount of time it takes to be able to test these characters out by not being able to hop into a match quickly. Something you'll probably of course just notice is the fact that the roster looks a lot different. So apparently this game's roster for the prototype only has about 16 to 17 characters in it, which might not sound like a lot, but something crazy is actually present here. For some reason they only allowed about 16 to 17 characters to be on the roster at once. However, inside of the game files all the characters are completely functional, and with the use of an action replay you're able to unlock the rest of the characters. However, unfortunately, through my many hours of trying to test this code, I could not get it to work, so unfortunately I won't be able to show gameplay of a ton of the characters, only the 16 that I was granted. However, all the characters are in the game, and they have an encyclopedia amount of changes. Just a novel essay format on the cutting room floor of just the amount of changes between every single character inside of BT3's prototype. It would just take hours, days to go over all the changes. So I'm going to of course leave a link to the cutting room floor in the description. Please check them out. This video would not be possible without the cutting room floor dictating all these changes that we've gone over and we will go over in a few. Just looking on screen, you'll just see the absolute smorgasbord of changes. It's just wild. Speaking of gameplay, I assume that's why a lot of you guys are super excited to see the prototype, is to see what changed between the final build and then the actual prototype. So we're going to quickly hop into a match and go over some of the changes that I've noticed, and maybe some of you guys might notice that I even haven't noticed. And then after that, we're going to go over a bunch of the actual gameplay center changes, just general changes for the universal battle system of Budokai Tenkaichi 3. So let's dive into a match. So first off, we have Majin Vegeta versus Kid Buu, as you can see on screen. The gameplay is extremely similar to the actual final build. The fighting system's the exact same, the combos are the exact same, and the game overall feels very similar to the final game. However, a bunch of changes actually take place aesthetically here, and even some performance changes. So the first thing I noticed that was different is Majin Vegeta's Energy Storm is actually purple instead of yellow in the prototype. In the final build, all versions of Super Saiyan Vegeta's Energy Storm ability are yellow. However, it's actually purple in the prototype, which I'm just going to flat out tell you, I think the purple from Majin Vegeta looks way better than the yellow, and this is one of my favorite features that we've seen so far of the prototype, this being purple instead of yellow. Very interesting and very cool cool change. Another change I've noticed in the actual prototype is the fact that the Final Impact behaves all like other beams in Budokai Tenkaichi 2. Final Impact in BT3's final version, it's just like it's like a stab attack. You know what I'm talking about. Kind of like Vegeto's split finger shot. It's like a stab. Well, the Final Impact is more like a burst or a beam here to just hit the opponent over and over. As we continue fighting Kid Buu, the gameplay obviously looks very similar. I'm actually going to be putting up just some gameplay to put a match or two up on screen without my commentary so you guys can observe. Maybe you guys might be able to see any differences that I haven't noticed. But just for this first match, I'll just commentate over some of the interesting stuff that's happening on screen. So the last change that I've noticed that was very cool, and something I'll get into in a minute, is actually the final explosion does not kill you. If you're not aware, in most Dragon Ball games actually, the final explosion will do something to hinder you. Either kill you with health, Xenoverse that lowers your stamina, something like that, but it always is a very strong attack. However, in the prototype here, it actually does not kill Vegeta, and what's more is it doesn't put him in battle damage status either like it does in the final game. This is of course insane, and probably makes Vegeta S tier in the prototype meta. I thought that's pretty cool. It's really fun to mess around and just keep spamming this on enemies, just to see just how fast you can kill them. Speaking of one-shotting your opponent doing a lot of damage, if you remember BT3, Goku Mid actually having his ability Give Me Energy, that ability exists in the prototype. However, it doesn't actually power up the Spirit Bomb, which makes it so Goku can't actually one-shot his opponent. Anyway, now that we're back on the roster. So first of all, a keen eye might notice that you might see on screen right now Goku Mid, right? So Goku's Mid's render is actually a lot different than it is in the final build. You can see in this version of the game's render, he's just looking straight, right? Well, in the final build, you can see his eyes look a little bit different and he's looking more so to the right. This is something present across the entire prototype, and a bunch of characters actually having completely different renders than they did in the final game. Having different facial expressions, having different looks to their characters. While we're still on the topic of gameplay-centric changes, I wanted to go over a few things that I found as well when just doing some matches, just playing against the AI with some of these prototype-esque characters. So the first thing I noticed is actually pretty interesting. Remember in my BT3 Iceberg when I went over the Kaiken Kamehameha entry? Well, the spelling error in the final build is actually corrected, and it's actually spelled the Kaioken Kamehameha like it should have always been. The reason for this, I believe, is because they got rid of that little hyphen in between the Kaio and Ken in the final build, but they accidentally got rid of the O as well when backspacing that entry, which is very funny. I was blown away when I saw that. Some character attacks are actually changed in terms of the name. The most notable one I can think of is Goku's I'm Getting Excited attack being changed to This Is Exciting, which is pretty cool. There's just a bunch of little changes like that throughout the game. Something else I noticed that you guys might have just picked up on as well is that Goku's aura, unlike the other characters who have the BT2 aura, Goku's aura is actually correct, and it actually has the correct blue color used in the final game. Another thing I noticed, this isn't really gameplay centric, but the minigame font change for the loading screen is actually a little different. One of the coolest changes I noticed is with Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, who's actually a playable character in this prototype. His attacks are, normal like normal, but something really fun I noticed with it is his Big Bang Kamehameha ultimate attack is more exactly like it is Budokai 3. It's like a wave rather than just a beam, just like a wave of energy, kind of like an Infinite World as well. This was sick to me. Like, I think I prefer this over the final build, to be honest with you. The way this Big Bang Kamehameha looks, it's so badass.
Send you to the next world with this. Time 100!
Something else I picked up on in my time in the prototype is actually that Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta charges a lot slower than he does in the final game. My guesstimate for why this happens is because Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta in the final game is actually one of the strongest characters in the game, and he does a lot more damage with those super attacks than all other characters, so I assume originally he was meant to charge a lot slower, but I guess some point in development they ended up changing their minds on that, which I think was probably for the better, because definitely Gogeta has some awesome attacks, and being able to not charge up as fast with him would not be as fun as he is in the final game. So I think it was a good change overall, and items help balance these characters out, in my opinion. Something else I noticed as well is actually with Mid Goku again, his Angry Kamehameha is actually missing an effect with the beam shooting out. This is pretty funny, because in Budokai Tenkaichi 2, the Angry Kamehameha already exists, so I wonder how the VFX got messed up. Maybe he got messed up when transferring the attack from a Super to an Ultimate, I'm not sure, but it's pretty cool. Something else I noticed is actually King Vegeta's Gallic Gun is spelled Garlic Gun. This was an error in BT2 with Super Baby 2 and Grade 8 Vegeta. I assume this because the Garlic Gun entry, message entry, was probably just copy and pasted and they didn't fix it into the final build. Super Gallic Gun also behaves exactly like it did in Budokai Tenkaichi 2.
Garlic Gun!
King Vegeta's aura is also functional like Mid-Goku's base aura, though it does look a little different than the final game. And the last thing I noticed, when you transform in this game with some characters, it doesn't actually have any sound effects, which I thought was pretty interesting as well.
You will die.
Those are the changes that I personally noticed, but I do want to go over just a few more changes just related to the universal BT3 battle system, and my theories on why the things that are the way they are in this prototype were changed in the final build. So let's dive into that. Some of the other main notable changes between the prototype and the final build are that, of course, on the main menu, it has a bunch of different sound effects in the final version. The sound effects on the character select screen are a lot different. For some reason, all super and ultimate attack do more damage. I assume this was probably put in place because items weren't in the game yet. In the final build, items are of course in the game. When you boost a super attack, no sound effect is played. I believe this was because in Budokai Tenkaichi 2, actually, you couldn't boost super attacks, and since this game, as you will be able to just tell by the gameplay, is very similar to BT2, and the fact that since boosting wasn't a thing, they just put the sound effect in yet, very cool. The AI can't boost their super attacks like they can in the final game, even if a human player is controlling them, which is pretty interesting. Every version of the Kamehameha actually costs 2 key bars in the final. Every version of the Kamehameha in this game's prototype actually costs 2 key bars, but in the final game, all non-ultimate attack Kamehamehas cost 3 key bars, which is pretty cool. Blast combos and beam struggles is disabled. Blast combos being the little skirmish your characters get in when they both dash into each other, and everyone knows what beam struggles are. Those are not present in here. Something very interesting is that none of the combatants can actually become battle damage. Despite their data being in the game for the battle damage costumes, no character can actually get battle damage. Once again, in Budokai Tenkaichi 2, the battle damage was just tied to being hit a lot rather than getting hit by an ultimate attack. And because this game was built off BT2 and because BT3's battle damage only is triggered by a beam struggle or a cutscene ultimate attack, battle damage doesn't exist yet. Funnily enough, when the planet is blown up by an ultimate attack, the HUD will shake like crazy. Something very cool is that the fact that most Grade 8 characters like Bardock, Fasha, and Raditz can actually transform on stages without the full moon. In fact, they can transform in any stage at all. In the final game, they need to be on a stage that has the full moon on it. Playing at night for some reason doesn't count, but any of the other ones do. Taunting is actually disabled in this version of the game. I'm not entirely sure why, as the other games did have them, but it's definitely something that's very interesting. I assume it was probably used to be able to test idle stances for the characters, because of course, the way taunting in BT3 works isn't like it is in the others. You just gotta stand still for a minute to be able to get the taunt off. So I assume they were removed so they can just test out the idle stances for the characters. Because of the game's universal setting, pretty much, with a lot of things being the exact same as each other, a bunch of throws in the game use the exact same parameters, meaning Android characters like 19 and 20 and Super 17 can't actually absorb their opponent's health and ki. This probably would also apply to Cell with his Drain Life Cell attack and all that, which is pretty interesting. Those are just a few of the general gameplay changes from the final build. A lot of these I thought were pretty neat, especially the Grade 8 ones not being able to be transformed on any map in the final build, but in the prototype they can be transformed on any map. I kind of wish this was actually in the full game, but it makes sense why it's not. I don't love how beam struggles are disabled, and it kind of makes me wonder why they are. It's probably just due to the fact that they weren't completed at this point, but just the amount of craziness found inside this game's prototype is pretty wild. And before we finish up, one more thing I want to go over for today's video is I just want to leave you guys off with a match I had against the AI in the game's prototype, just to highlight the changes. Like, it's explaining can only do so much. It's just showing you a game I had. I might even throw a second game in there. I'm not sure at the time I'm recording this audio segment, but I just want to leave you guys off with at least a match showing you just how different the game can feel with some incomplete attacks, with attacks being named differently, or just functioning differently entirely. Regardless, everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's deep dive kind of into the game's prototype. So before this gets too long, I'm going to end it here, but leave you guys off with this and have a good one.
Time is wasting. Let's hurry up and end this. Come on. Now is your time to die.
Ready. Fight.
to the next world with this. Time 100! Ah! Too slow! High stakes! Here goes! It's over!
Finish!
I was sure you'd be better than that.